This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For August 25th, 2023, it's the best-sounding podcast in higher ed AV. This is the AV SuperFriends. Broadcasting live to tape from coast to coast, easternmost to westernmost, northernmost to southernmost, gate post to hitching post. I'm your local host who can boast the most milquetoast and utmost humility. I'm Chris Decter, and it's time for another Friday afternoon podcast adventure. So let's say hello to our esteemed panel of AV SuperFriends. Today I'm joined by an interactive branding assistant from Kansas City, Jamie Reinhart, a direct optimization strategist from Corvallis, Oregon, Mark Kolowazinski, a global ideation engineer from Northern Virginia, Rachel Bradshaw, a future residence specialist from North Carolina, Larry Darling, and a legacy marketing strategist from Southern Kentucky, Justin Rexing.
Hello.
I didn't know I was good at marketing.
You guys are great at all of this stuff. So, on today's show, we're going to discuss avoiding focusing on the stuff in our learning spaces, that there's just too many damn flavors of Dante. But first, let's do the news. And today's article comes from some dude's Substack. I don't have a better link for it.
Dude's Substack.
That's literally where it comes from. I don't remember where we saw
the
this,
internet
but
has come to.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thanks, Elon.
Yeah. I don't know if we can classify that as news, though.
You can classify a lot of shit as news that isn't. But
News to me.
so the title on this one is, which is why we're talking about it. So congratulations for trolling that esports is unraveling, the segment that gaming never needed. And I think we wanted to bring this up because it's a different take on esports. Primarily what it's saying is gamers, true gamers, whatever that means, are not interested in esports as an organizational activity of any sort. And that esports is going to go away soon and the world will be better for it. Any thoughts?
This is gatekeepy bullshit. My eyes cannot roll hard enough.
It sounds like it might
That
be
is the
saturated.
best reaction that anybody has had to this.
Seriously,
Maybe
I don't have a
saturation,
follow-up to
but
that.
it's not dying. It's here. It keeps
Is it
growing.
saturated?
What he thought it would be, but that doesn't mean it's
Doesn't
not.
mean it's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just because it doesn't resemble his argument seems to me to be that like esports is not the NFL. And he makes this point about how like if the NFL went away, then people would no longer dream of being professional football players, but if esports went away, then people would still play video games. And that's like true on the face of it, but I think it's a complete misread of the value of esports.
Man, and I've been terrified the Cornhole League was going to fold.
It
actually
reads to me
did.
like somebody who didn't make the tryout for the team. So you're not hell with you all. This is all garbage anyway.
Esports
no one's gonna want this
players aren't
anyway.
real gamers. Like I have no patience for this.
People that are in college esports are the pro failures. Yeah, but they have a scholarship. Shut up.
Making more money than you. They're making money.
Yeah, and they're
we-
like forming
we are just a bunch
connections
of
and
dicks
learning
today.
things and developing leadership skills. Like, I don't know. I
So we
think the idea that
So
we
you
want to
think he's a little jelly? Is he jelly?
Maybe.
yeah,
It's
this
possible.
is loser energy. That was my whole ring.
Wow.
Bringing the fire today.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Let's check
clearly
the
still.
mailbag in like 24 hours on this.
Yeah,
It's forwarded
I
to
come on
Rachel.
the podcast one time, throw a few fireballs, and then I'll disappear for another quarter.
we have to change all of our notes
But-
because of this perspective. We didn't get this. We weren't expecting this.
You know, in a little bit of support of this perspective is I think it has plateaued in its growth. I think it has reached it's I don't think
The
we're going to
numbers
see
don't say so.
I don't know. That might be more of a reflection of
skyrocketing-
the market and not necessarily, this impending budget calamity that's happening maybe in higher ed. But I don't know if that. I think esports adjacent to higher ed is still like moving forward.
Viewership is still up.
Well, Larry, you have an esports arena, a widely touted esports arena. Are you guys seeing it sitting empty? Is nobody using it? Is it just available for kids' birthday parties and watching Rick and Morty reruns all day? Or is it wall-to-wall people in there actually using it?
It's not dying. I do see the people, but I think what Rachel said about the community aspect, all the learning opportunities it provides, even if what this cat says is true and it is dying, it is still a valuable resource to the higher ed experience, in my opinion.
Okay.
But the stats don't really agree with him either. Like, yes, some of the, he mentioned several of the leagues that are going under. That's true, but there's still new leagues that are forming. There's the viewership is still there. Like, it's not making money the way they thought it would, but it's still growing and there's still opportunities there.
Yeah, my 1960s pinball league folded, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, look how much money it was. Like, there was investors coming out of the woodwork to throw money at esports, 9 months ago. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's obviously going to cool off, but that doesn't change the fundamental value that it has. It's like, okay, maybe it's not an investable asset at this point, but there's still value from teaching and learning, and the whole piece of it, the core still stays the same. Nothing's changed about any of that.
Yeah, I think what I take the most issue is, I think that if you made the argument, what were commercial esports arenas a zero interest rate phenomenon, I'm interested in that argument, quite possibly.
Yeah.
But what I took issue with in the article was the suggestion that esports doesn't have value to the gaming community, because I think that esports has, to Larry's point, exactly. It has created a mechanism for kids who are gamers to have athletic scholarships at the school of their choice. It has created avenues of opportunity for a totally different kind of kid. And that's valuable. And that's going to remain valuable. That'll be valuable whether or not there's ever an NFL of esports.
And the one weird spin on this, and I was like, well, whatever, if it's true or false, but I'm wondering, is there actually this renewal of esports about to happen with all of the shakeups and all the conferences and all the stuff that's going on? Is that now a new opportunity for universities and to rethink about how esports actually plays into their actual
football?
Place?
Here comes esports.
Yeah. Well, no. Is it going to provide additional value to these? I'm in the middle of it. I'm the odd man out in Pac-12. Right here we are.
You're in the Pac-2.
Yeah, we're in the Pac-2. So here we are.
Toast.
And so, what does that mean?
You might win.
People that are left, right? So. Whatever.
Oh, wow.
Could be
in the championship game.
You might be right.
Shot.
So,
of course,
Jesus.
There's opportunity there. That's all I'm saying. I got to look at the silver lining into this dark cloud here. There's got to be something.
Well, one thing I did want to raise from this article is one of his examples, or not one, but one of the things he brought up was there were these large events. There was these huge venues in sporting arenas and concert halls and things where they were doing these massive competitions and things, and it was selling out tens of thousands of people. Well, but he's pointing out but those don't happen anymore. Well, there was also this little thing called COVID, so we stopped.
I'm sorry for our listeners who aren't familiar. Chris, can you?
What was COVID?
I want to explain to you what that. They're an AV manufacturer out of Phoenix, Arizona, who make fantastic little devices, widgets, and tchotchkes. Highly recommended. So it's logical that you're not going to see that same uptick immediately come right back. It's not to say that we're not going to see those again, but you might not get 30,000 people. You may have 3,000 people. You may have 1,500 people.
Don't schedule your event the same day Taylor Swift's in town.
And again, I feel like that is trying to force esports into our understanding of athletic experiences. We need to have a big arena. Why? Everything's virtual. We just need to stream it out on Twitch and we'll get more viewers than a college football
game. But Larry, we can
point.
sell them $37 hot dogs if they
we can do that. Yes. Yeah. But we can make online hot dogs.
Yeah, we just got to make NFTs of the hot dogs and then step through.
Only play
Speaking
in
of hot dogs,
Dogecoin.
Do you think they said this about the hot dog eating contest? And by God, that thing still runs every July 4th.
I've worked that thing. It's always hotter than hell down there.
And everybody watches, and there's always a crowd.
Do they?
I'm just
Do they
saying,
really?
you'd be surprised what people watch out there. If somebody's willing to watch somebody stuff hot dogs in their mouth, they can watch esports.
League.
All right.
Pickleball league.
Any last
right.
thoughts on the death of esports and the fact that it's going away? We'll never hear from it again.
The only other point that he made that I kind of want to mention is he said that I can go on YouTube and watch much better players play a video game that's not in esports and learn how to do that. And like he's kind of comparing it. Well, that's true of almost anything. Like I like to mountain bike. I have several influencers in the mountain bike community who are semi-professional that I will watch their YouTube videos to find out how to do it better. However, that doesn't take away the fact I will still watch a mountain bike event. Yeah. Like they're two separate things. And
no, Larry, you pick one.
Watching one
pick
doesn't
one.
take away
pick
from
one,
so much
that's it.
bandwidth. Pick one you're going to invest in. That's it.
Yeah.
Are you watching a guy go down a hill, or are you going and watching people go down a hill in person?
You get
Only
up
pick
or
one.
down the hill. Pick one. You don't get both.
Yeah, you don't get both there.
I'm an uphill mountain bike racer. It's very difficult.
Yeah, you throw the bike in the truck and drive it up the hill.
Don't tell people the secret.
Oh, sorry.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Don Merritt from the University of Central Florida about how to do things correctly when talking about learning spaces.
Hey y'all, I've got this new show I got to tell you about. It's called AVSF Live. That's LIVE exclamation point. First off, all you need to do is go to avsf.live.live, not .com, not .net, but .live. Yes, it's a website, does work. We're going to try out this new live video thing. It's probably going to go over like a hair in a biscuit. You got to check it out. Come to the tweeters and look us up on LinkedIn to find out more information. We'll see y'all soon.
Well, I want to welcome to the show Donnie Merritt. Welcome, Donnie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Donnie's the Director of Instructional Resources at University of Central Florida. Good friend of ours, good friend of mine. And when we were talking about this or discussing this topic, like how would we want to approach this discussion of like avoiding this temptation of like only focusing on the stuff? Mark, I think you raised the question. You said, well, let's find someone who's doing it right. Let's find someone who has figured out or at least has a better approach to kind of working on classifying learning space needs and things, but not going straight to the stuff, which is where I think we all go. And Donnie, unfortunately, your name came up at the top of the list.
We're like, does anybody have any clue about who's doing this right at all? And I think overwhelmingly we all said, well, probably Donnie. He's probably the closest one of all of our crazy selves that do this. And I think I probably am guilty of bringing this up because we're in the midst of, I don't know, revolution, whatever it may be in our organization. And we've all done all the things. We've done the building. We've deployed all the tools. And the new leadership's like, okay, cool. And thank you for saying, here's your refresh, here's all that. But how did you determine that these things that you're doing are the things you should be doing? And it's been kind of turned on. It's like, well, how do you know what you're deploying is actually what is needed for teaching and learning success? And I think that's why we kind of got here today. We're like, well, who owns that definition? Where does it come from? Is it us? Is it somebody else? And that's where everybody said, well, Donnie must know the answer to this question. So here you are. So what's the answer?
Well, the answer is no one owns it. And that's part of the problem we all have right now. So
and that's the show. Thank you.
Well, and it's kind of funny you bring this up too, because this comes up every so often. Thank you. I'm flattered you guys feel like we're doing it well down here at UCF. I will say, I think there are a lot of other folks out there who have a good handle on what it is they're trying to do. But when I ask myself the question, who's doing it right, it would be those people who are connecting with their faculty first. And I say faculty kind of generically, but let's be honest about a couple of things too. Mark, you just mentioned that, leadership changes, all of those sorts of things can derail a research project. There are a lot of people out there right now, a lot of individuals who are focusing on improving student learning outcomes. And I use that term very specifically, student learning outcomes, because we're talking about making the environment better for them to learn in, to retain the information they're trying to pick up. And I'll show a little bit of my bias here. I am a technologist, but I am not a technophile, and I am not convinced that the answer to better student learning outcomes is technology. At the end of the day, and let me give you an example. So you've all heard of active learning, right? How many of you all have an active learning classroom out there?
Do I?
Yeah, Chris has the best active learning classroom.
Well, but see, here's the catch. What does that even mean? What is active learning?
Yeah.
Right? And so I'll tell you the easiest definition of active learning. Active learning is what faculty and students do in the classroom. It is a people activity. There is no such thing as an active learning solution, an active learning design, an active learning, any of that kind of stuff. It is because different faculty, different programs will approach active learning in different ways. It's engaging the student in the content, making them work through it. It's not lecture, but there's a much more give and take going on here. Number one, a lot of students hate it, just so you all know, because
that's why we need more of these, clearly.
Well, but here's the catch: they
can't sit in the back row and just sit there and absorb. Which is what a lot of us end up doing in K-12. That's how we've learned to learn. That actually isn't a very effective way for us to learn. But when they're put in these situations, it is actually measurable how much better they understand the material, grasp the material, remember the material once it's all said and done. But those activities are going to depend on the topic that's being discussed, the domain that you're working in. So from our point of view, we really feel like from a technology side, we have to engage with that faculty member. What are you doing in that space so that we can design a system that is going to support those activities? So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach here yet. I'll say that there are some things we're kind of glomming on, and I see a lot of this happening in a lot of different schools. It's the ability to share content easily with each other, whether it be faculty member or students, faculty to student, student to student, whatever. It's that sharing of content, group work, those sorts of technologies are really what a lot of people want. At the end of the day, a lot of them tell me, just give me a blackboard, several blackboards, cover this room of blackboards, and that's all the active learning that I need. Yeah, maybe, but occasionally you're going to want to do video, or someone else will need to show something in 3D, whatever the case is. So technology does come with it, at least in some of the domains. When I think about it, there are several schools out there that I think are doing this well. The two that come immediately to mind are Indiana with their Mosaic program, and Minnesota with a lot of the active learning research that has come out of the University of Minnesota. Those two, I think, have been doing this for a long time. They also, though, have a broad approach to research in this space, so that it's not an individual, it's not just one or two people working together. It is a systemic approach to figuring out what's the best way of doing this for this domain, for that domain, for all domains.
And there was a rather thick assessment guide that came, I think, did it come out of Minnesota or something like that? I remember somebody had published something from there on the active learning environment specifically. And I was like, wow, this is deep.
Well, the rating system came from Mosaic at Indiana.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned Mosaic, because I just listened to a presentation from Tracy Birdwell this past week. And what I found interesting in that presentation she gave examples of solitary active learning activities. And I had never even considered that active learning as a solitary endeavor was possible in a classroom. That just wasn't something that, like, in any of my experiences with designing active learning spaces came up. But it just, again, made me expand my idea of what active learning meant in any given scenario.
Yeah, it's about the student engaging with the content in a way that's meaningful for them, so they understand what it means and they can apply it, they can remember it, all of those sorts of things. I'm not that familiar with the individual, though. I guess if you really think about it, whenever I've taught video editing, things like that, a lot of times it is putting them in there, put this together, and they go, how? It's like, just start working on it, and I'll walk around and we'll kind of work on this together. Because you can step them through it, but at the end of the day, if they don't engage with it, if you tell them how to do it, they're not going to remember how to do it later. And so that, I will say though, we as technologists, one of the catches, it's a catch-22 for us, is because when people think about active learning, all of the marketing, all of the stuff has talked about the technology that goes with this. So they look at us and go, build me an active learning classroom. It's like, well, we need to talk. And for a lot of folks, they're not ready for that because they've not thought through what active learning is either. If it's not on the faculty member's radar or the chair's radar for their program or whatever it is, they may not realize how much it means to actually work with the faculty member first to design their course, their methodology around active learning principles. Once you do that, then we can talk about a room. Now, we've come to, like I said before, there are a few things that we're starting to make some assumptions on that I think a lot of people can kind of glom around. That's multi-monitors in a space. That's the easy wireless sharing of content. It's becoming more and more a capture sort of thing too, so that folks can go back and review given that. But at the end of the day, mobile furniture, all of these sorts of things, it's an ecosystem. It's not a simple solution you're just going to buy off the shelf. But if the faculty member, there is research out there that says you put a faculty member in one of these sophisticated rooms, they don't know how to use it, their class isn't set up to use it that way, the student learning outcomes go down in that class. Students learn less. It's not about the technology. It's about the faculty member and the students. So engaging them first is the most important thing to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think people have approached and asked me, like, what technology do I need or how to even be successful in an active learning space? And I said, the first thing is a faculty member who really wants to teach in that environment, right?
Yes.
I don't even want any, you can do it with no technology, right?
Yep.
And I've also had that response from faculty. It's always often been just, well, what do you need to make this work? And it's like, well, just give me whatever. I'll figure out how to do it. And it's like, well, that's not really helping me. You're not really helping me define anything. They're ready to just MacGyver themselves to success, and they will. And it's, but I think you kind of have the belief system that it's highly complicated or it's super simple, right? And the reality exists somewhere in between.
Yeah. I have to wonder if the groundswell of large language model AIs that we're seeing is going to accelerate this process or sort of force that conversation with a lot of faculty members, because there is, I think we can all admit, a large class of people both on the student and faculty side who've been very resistant to the idea of active learning, very resistant to the idea of flipped classroom. It's not what they're used to. It's not how they learned. It's not how they've been teaching. And even though there's a large body of research showing that it's more effective for retention and student outcomes, it's very, very hard to just change the entire model of how you think about instruction. But AI is going to force us to do that, because I'm sorry, I cannot recall what much smarter person I heard say this on a podcast last week, but it has broken homework. The assignments that a lot of professors have built into their classes and that they have structured their curriculum on for years no longer work, will no longer assess whether or not a student has.
It's a disruption, and they need to embrace that they are not going to go back to the way it once was. Right?
So you now have to bring that practice into the classroom. That is how we have to assess from now on, because the old ways of assessment are broken. So, Donnie, has this been impacting the conversations that you're having with faculty already? Do you agree that this is going to accelerate or change the kind of conversations that we have with faculty, or where the impetus of moving towards active learning is coming from?
Yeah, I think what AI does most significantly is shine a light on how we are not supporting our face-to-face faculty in the endeavor of teaching as well as we should all across, not just this country, but others too. So UCF has a really great program for supporting our online faculty, and we've got some really good face-to-face faculty, but it does not scale up to the need. And that's true for a lot of places. I mean, your Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, or whatever you call it at your institution, these are folks who can help a faculty member answer some of these questions, but it's usually maybe a couple of people for how many hundreds of faculty? And there's no way to go through and help them to create these authentic assessments that we so desperately need. And there are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't have adopted an authentic assessment. An authentic assessment is something that actually shows comprehension and mastery of the content instead of just rote recitation or whatever the case may be. It's number one, it's hard to design those. Number two, it's hard to grade those sorts of things. As someone who has taught a class with essays, that is time consuming, right? And so you've got to factor that kind of workload into to the way you're managing your faculty and the way they manage their course time, and in addition to all of the other responsibilities that they have. And I'll mention this too, as someone who's gone through a PhD program that actually did put some focus on this. Not all programs out there focus on how to teach the content that PhD students are gathering, right? So it's talking about creating new knowledge, creating new information and disseminating that, but not always putting a focus on how to teach. The attitude in years past, at least, has been, well, they'll figure that out when they get there. There'll be someone there to help them do that.
Well, and the students are just hunter-gatherers at that point, right? That's what we've taught them to do. Go out and find the answer and bring it back to me and get your treat or your grade. And it's like, is this a fundamental problem of like, we don't teach students how to learn? Like, we're focusing on like how we teach, but do we overlook the whole how do students learn aspect of this?
Well,
Yes.
and even those authentic assessments that we've relied on in the past, such as the essay, are now kind of broken. Like if you have a student write an essay outside of class and or even inside of class, but on a connected device, you have no way of knowing how much of that is reflective of the student's comprehension of the material and how much of it is reflective of their ability to prompt a generative AI. So we really have to totally rethink from the ground up, not only how we're assessing, but what we're assessing and why.
And
But
the
also-
spaces we're doing that in, because as we come up with these new student outcomes that we're expecting them to come and construct their own knowledge and then have experiential chances to show that knowledge, our standard lecture halls simply do not work for those types of of experiences.
No, I do think there is still value in, call it the sage on the stage. I do think that there are that can be used to
100%.
disseminate
100%.
information effectively, but that's not exactly the modern learning space, right?
That's probably what the registrar's belief may be, though, for a lot of institutions, that's the typical model. So just make me a lot of spaces that can just do that. And it's like,
I do think it's an important
Donnie, not to
model.
put
I
words in your
think that
mouth,
there
but,
is
yeah.
like, oh, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was going to say, you didn't, just to clarify, you're not saying that that's the only modality that's important. You're saying that for certain topics, that is an effective way to do it.
Well, yeah, and maybe certain topics within a class itself, right? So,
Foundations. Like you can't innovate until you understand the fundamentals.
Well, and so, but then there's also just getting out new information. So one of the first classes I taught at UCF was a media law class in the fall of 2001. Now, after 9/11, we basically came into class and said everything in the textbook is probably going to be wrong in 6 months. So, and it was
prescient,
and it was, right?
It was.
So, yeah, very much so. So we would come back into class, and after some case had gone through, I was like, all right, let me explain what this means. That's kind of the sage on the stage. This just happened yesterday. Let me explain it now, because there's not some other way for you all to kind of figure this out yourselves. You need to be guided in understanding this material. But at other times, you want them talking to each other, helping each other learn, because as you teach someone, you also learn it better yourself, right? So and that's kind of one of the principles of active learning, is getting folks involved and not just learning themselves, but helping others learn and building these communities individually. I do want to go back, though, that and as technology people, IT general, but AV specifically, sometimes we can forget how much is put on faculty members' plates. Like if you're a tenure track faculty member, you've got to teach, you have to research, there is service involved in everything that you do, and office hours, which are also part of what you do. The number of hours we ask our faculty to give back to the institution during that time builds up fast. And so I just want to caution everybody out there who's in the technology field. I would ask you to remember that there's more on their plate than you think there is. And so when it comes to whatever we're doing in the learning spaces that we're creating, one of the things we want to do, whether it's active learning or lecture or whatever, is to keep it as simple as possible. Put yourself in their shoes. I want to walk in the room. I want to start teaching immediately. I don't want to have to do anything. Let me just go. And that's not an unreasonable expectation from their point of view. It's just trying to figure out what that means. One of the things that complicates this whole question of what is the right design, what is the right approach, is that we're all not using the same definitions yet. And
Whoa.
I know.
What do you mean?
It's crazy idea, but hear me out here. So, I mean, when it comes back to, because I'm doing a little side project for our CIO right now, and it has to do with something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. What's the right number of support staff to the number of spaces that you support?
The old equation.
Well, there is a single answer for that. It's more than you have.
Yeah, well, yes. Unfortunately, he would like to attach some numbers to it. But fortunately, it's kind of kicking off something. And there are definitions we can use, at least the institutions use, but we in the technology groups, IT generally, but AV specifically, don't always use those definitions. Mm-hmm. So there are classifications, national standards for classifications for what a classroom is, what a conference room is, what all of these other things are. However, when we talk about these spaces, we're usually talking about how they're used. My class meets in this space, therefore it is a classroom. And that's not the case. So the first thing we all kind of have to start agreeing on is to use some standard definitions in the way that we identify these things so that we can move towards a common understanding of, number one, what we're building, where we're building it, and who we're building it for. Because until we do that, I think that some of the research that folks are doing on the teaching and learning side is going to be hampered, because it's going to be whatever it's going to, the definitions that they're using are dangerously, we're in danger of using those local definitions instead of something that can be transferred to other places.
I love it. Do you have any references for any of that stuff that you can share? Like where can somebody find some of those common definitions?
So one of the ones right now, let me see if I can pull it up. Well, I tell you what, I'll send it out and you can drop it in your line. But there is the, I'm going blank on the name. You do this to me right off the bat.
That's on brand for us.
Yeah, it's the National Center for Education Statistics. Okay. And the Florida Board of Governors actually uses the space definitions from that group in order to classify all the spaces that get reported up to the Board of Governors. So all of the state university systems, state university schools in Florida have someone, it's the space person at their institution, has a count of how many actual classrooms you have. And the first time I sat down with our space person, we realized that we were calling things classrooms that they were not reporting as classrooms, and vice versa. So that, number one, is kind of a learning experience for what does your institution actually think they have, the people who are responsible for reporting this information. And then let's start moving our conversations towards aligning with those reportable numbers. We're using it to guide the budget that we're creating for our technology refresh plan. If it is reported as a classroom or a conference room, we're going to include it in our refresh plan. And if it is not, that'll be a different conversation. And that has made a lot of people go, well, what is my space classified as? It's like, you should probably have that conversation with the space person, because I can't answer that question. I'm just using what's reported to the Board of Governors.
That's an interesting thing. That's a deal that we've, I think Mark turned me onto this before, that I started the conversation on, is that to reclass your learning spaces, because that can include more than just the classroom. That can even be the gymnasium for PE, majors of some sort, right? And that's a lot of different locations. And I've started that conversation with our registrar, with our space planners, and they went, oh, that all makes a ton of sense and would probably clean up our scheduling assets pool, because people would be knowing exactly what they're looking for instead of just give me a classroom. Wait, I meant this other kind. Yeah. What I meant was a lecture hall. What I meant was...
Yeah. And so here's the catch, though. The National Center for Education Statistics are very specific in what they call a classroom. So that's one of the reasons why I'm leaning on the space administration folks to tell me their definitions. And so we've got a lot of other play in there. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to equip another space to support teaching and learning just because it's not designated as a classroom. It just gives me some solid numbers to start doing strategic planning around. And so we know learning happens in all kinds of spaces. Ideally, going back to the whole active learning question, we should really be creating learning campuses, not just learning spaces. We're privileging that teaching and learning activity in specific locations when we should be making whatever those activities are, we should be making it easier for them to take place anywhere on campus. But that's kind of next step. The first thing is really getting a handle on the spaces that we have. And so that we can do those institution to institution comparisons, we really need those kinds of national standards and national definitions. Otherwise, what you call a classroom, to your point, you may call your classroom, a gym, a classroom. We might not call it that. So we're not really talking apples to apples when we're comparing statistics across institutions here.
Gotcha. Do you have any examples of language of capability of a classroom or a conference room? Because I think that's a mythical language we're looking for here as well from times is don't tell me the stuff that's in the room. I don't care about the stuff. What is the capability as it pertains to teaching and learning? And do you have a standard set of like all spaces are capable of X, Y, and Z?
We do. So there are guidelines that we use as we're building out our learning spaces. It will have some sort of display capability. It will have some sort of wireless content sharing capability, voice reinforcement. Regardless of room size, we're putting voice reinforcement everywhere for accessibility reasons. And so we're going above and beyond code on this one. We do document cameras in all of our spaces. So we try to talk about those kinds of capabilities in that standard instead of the technology. Everyone kind of refers to the manufacturer around here, and I would rather our faculty not know what the manufacturer is. I know that can be a little tense conversation with some folks, but at the end of the day, if something happens, like we've got to move to entirely new microphones for our classrooms because what we used to use isn't manufactured anymore. I don't want to have to come back and go, oh, no, now that's actually this now. I just want you to talk about a microphone. So we try to be generic when we've written those standards. That way that someone outside the university, if we're working with an installer or something like that, they understand the capabilities that we're about. Now, if we're working with an installer, we're going to give them equipment list. But if it's a consultant or someone else like that, they get what sort of activities we're trying to support in that space. But also our faculty and frankly, our students can understand that too. This is what you should be able to do in this space. But some of that, I don't think they're going back to what I was saying earlier. I don't think we have great shared language around that across the country either. So in some ways, you kind of keep it as generic as possible, and sooner or later, that just becomes its own shared language.
And was there considerable faculty engagement done with creating that language? Was there a consortium of faculty like, we want to be able to show big pictures, hear ourselves talk, make sure that was there consensus on we agree that this is the common, teaching and learning strategies we want to be able to do in a classroom?
The document that we have is several years of back and forth with individual and groups of faculty. So did we get everyone together, sit down, and this is the outcome of one big meeting or group? No. It is the accumulation of lots of conversations with lots of people over several years. So our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning does 2 in-house conferences every year, and our group would often participate in one of those. It'd be an Ask Me Anything kind of session or just a feedback session. Hey, we're thinking about doing some other things in the classrooms. If you're interested, come to our session and let's talk it through. So it's been that kind of iteration over the years. And sometimes it'll be an offhand comment someone will make to one of our classroom support folks. Hey, this faculty member said it'd be neat if this was a good idea. Like, we should probably ask other faculty if they like that idea. And sure enough, it's something that works its way into our standard. Like a digital clock in the back of the room. You laugh, but a lot of the clocks that we have in our classrooms are battery powered. So eventually they die. And usually they're 12, 15 feet off the floor. So no one's changing that kind of thing anytime soon.
Ladder in there, yeah.
Yeah, but I know everyone has a device and this and that, but when you're in the moment, being able to look up and see, oh, class ends in 5 minutes, I should probably wrap this up. That helps people in the space manage their time, and it helps us manage the space too, because we don't have to go chase people out. But little things like that.
Rachel, you had a comment a few minutes ago. You were going to bring it from a different perspective. want to make sure we get to
on you
that.
and ruined it. Sorry.
Yeah, from a layperson.
Mark's fault.
Well, I was going to ask from my prurient layperson perspective, what spaces do you have or manage that you were surprised to discover weren't in fact classrooms, that you had previously thought were classrooms? And I know that there's no such thing as an ideal mix, but you were talking earlier about the idea of the learning campus, and I'm wondering if you can give us a sketch of some of the different varieties of spaces, classroom and other, that it's valuable to have at your disposal to support different kinds of learning.
So going back to the spaces that caught us by surprise, in one of the physical sciences buildings, there's we would call it a split classroom or a dividable classroom, divider down the middle. You can use it as one big room or two small rooms. Yeah, that's actually classified. Well, yeah, they are their own kind of special. But that's actually classified by the university as a conference room. And I went back through the notes, and it's because when we were building the space, the faculty in their conversations with the architects were saying, we want to have conferences. We want to host conferences in this space.
Perfect.
So it became designated a conference room on the plans, because that's what they call it. That's what I mean by we need to move away from what people call the space and some sort of standard definition of what the space actually is. Because you never know when little things like that can pop up. But that's just one example. And you can't blame them. We've set it up like a classroom. They use it like a classroom. But in their heads, they do conferences in that space. So... again, shared language, shared definitions, it will take us years to get there, but we do have those out there. We just got to move in that direction. Now, going back to other spaces across campus, I would actually make the argument that, number one, Wi-Fi has got to be ubiquitous, absolutely everywhere, including stairwells. Like during the first semester we were back after the shutdown, there were students sitting out in our stairwells because they didn't want to be mixed in with anyone else, but our Wi-Fi doesn't extend to some of the stairwells. And they were watching their remote class from that stairwell. So we really need to think about this could be happening anywhere at this point. Open spaces between buildings, whatever. But also, every display you walk past is a potential teaching and learning spot. Because if I can stop and go, I'm having a conversation with a student walking across campus, they're not grasping the concept, we're after class or whatever, it's like, here, let me show you. And then I can send that to that digital signage display standing next to me, and we can do this little thing. Not only have she and I worked out this conversation, but who knows who else is going to see that walking by and be interested or go, oh, I didn't know that. Or maybe someone else go, well, wait a minute, but did you think of this? It's those kinds of opportunities popping up that I think those sorts of technologies, I mean, they're out there, we're hanging them everywhere, but we don't always think of them in that way. I think we're very honed in on the specific use case when we hang a piece of glass on the wall, that we're not always thinking through what else it might be used for, or even setting up a room, what other things people might want to do in some of these spaces. When we set up our sandbox classroom, Chris, I know you've been to our sandbox classroom. It's a nice space. It was grant funded. There's a lot of shiny technology in there.
It's got stuff behind glass.
It's got stuff behind glass.
Glass in case of emergency kind of stuff? Or what are we talking about?
Please don't. That stuff is way too hard to replace. But the first semester is open. It wasn't full of faculty, so it wasn't full of classes, and we had left the room unlocked. And the faculty center, it's a joint space between us and the faculty center. And they came over and was like, there are students in the classroom. Okay. It's like, no, there's no class going on. They're just students hanging out in the classroom. Let's go see what they're doing. So we went in, and they had come in, learned how to use the wireless technology themselves. Were using the writing on the glass and everything else. They were using it as a study space. And they said, do you mind if we stay? And it was a real conversation. It's like, is it okay for them to be in there or not? We finally came to the conclusion, yes, because that's kind of what we want, is to get that kind of feedback about how people use this equipment, would use these spaces. So watching them in their natural habitat, it makes sense. So what that told us...
That was the glass. You just had
binoculars.
Well, actually, one of the walls is a glass wall, so you can actually kind of watch what's going on in there.
The aquarium room.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Well, we've actually used a projector to shoot some aquarium video on that wall too. It's actually really cool. But that kind of told us that these sorts of activities, if we if students had these capabilities in other spaces across campus, they might be using these other spaces across campus. So as we're setting up these little study nooks, we're starting to make sure that they've all got wireless connectivity to them. We're trying to make sure we've got more writing surfaces or erasable surfaces, depending on who you ask, in some of these study spaces, because that's what students use. We've actually seen them use Windows in our building to write on because they didn't have anything else to write on. It's Sharpie or Magic Marker, it's glass, it's going to come right off. But that tells us that there's a need that's not being met by the way we're setting up these spaces. So and that's what I mean by a learning campus, creating these opportunities for just happenstance and not making people feel like they have to go to a particular place to have a particular kind of conversation. Learning should be something that happens everywhere at all times. And we really need to think about our campuses generally, just from right down to the architecture. We need to be thinking about how to enable those kinds of behaviors.
I like the approach there of like, we're just going to provide a bunch of locations where there's different types of capabilities and just make it available to people, which is hey, if they use it, great. If not, then we'll retool that and think about something else. But yeah, like the writing on the windows, for example.
Interesting security challenge, though.
So
yeah, potentially.
But here's the thing.
Not insurmountable, just interesting.
I will say, I will credit the UCF students for this because I've been amazed by this since I got there. Our loss is very, very low when it comes to AV technology. Have we had incidents? Of course. But overall, I truly believe if you trust them, most of the time they'll return that trust.
I wasn't even thinking about the physical security. I was thinking that if I could take over the digital signage in the hallway, the very first thing I would do is go, oh my God, you've never seen Tom Holland do the Rihanna dance? You got to stop. We have to do this right now. Everybody needs to enjoy this.
I have actually seen that video. It is worth seeing.
It is incredible. It's my absolute favorite YouTube video. The internet peaked that day.
Yes, it did.
Let's run it now.
Yeah. That's an interesting, that informal use, because we've made some investments in that same regard, and it is really popular, but it comes at the really unique cost of the budget model, right? Because it's not tied to, a curriculum specifically. It's not a departmental space. And so it causes us to really get creative with how we're going to carry our operations budget and refresh and all that to address those things, because it's adjacent to the teaching and learning kind of mission. And we know it's absolutely needed. I mean, our building is intentionally built with that type of space, but whose is it? Where does it fall? And what are the best practices around that? And I think that's just another variant of type of classification of room that we have to kind of get more accustomed to treating moving forward, because I think it is extremely popular and I think it is needed in the modern era of teaching and learning.
There is. And if you want to crystallize some momentum around this is part of student success. So talk to your student success folks. What kinds of activities, tutoring or just general sorts of things do the students need, and how do we enable that in more places across campus? I think if you start with that focus on the student and student success, you might find some of these conversations changing, because especially in the state of Florida, student success is one of the things that the legislature measures every state university on. So anything that can show positive impacts on that suddenly gets more attention than other things. Now, that again, though, comes back to how do we measure the outcomes, this or that. We, as technologists, aren't always the ones who can answer that question. So we've got to make sure we're partnering with people across the campus who can. And my bet is there are some folks in your student success organization, whomever is responsible for that at your institution, who might have some ideas that you might be able to support and not know it.
I think everybody has one, that organization. I think we've said in the past, if you don't know who they are, look them up, go find out who they are, and definitely sit down with them, go buy them a cup of coffee, let them know who you are, and let them know you're there to support that mission just as well. And I think it often can get lost really easily. We just caught up in the day-to-day operations we often lose sight of who should be at the table having this discussion with us.
Well, and oftentimes we think of we're technology people, it's not supposed to be us, but why not? I mean, if you're curious, because Chris and I have had this conversation, you find out a meeting's going on. Hey, you mind if I sit in? Oftentimes, you might be surprised how often they say, sure, come on in. And you never know where it's going to lead from there.
I do want to caution, though, and to your point about definitions, that a lot of people are now using that phrase, student success, as like a very genericized kind of student-focused organization, which almost has nothing to do with from the academic success standpoint. More of, they may have different missions on campus, so you may have to weed through the 5 or 6 that actually exist on campus with that name to find the 1 or 2 who really link up with what you're trying to do, as far as looking at from the academic, from the teaching and learning aspects of that's really going to inform how to build those learning spaces.
I was going to say that too. That seems to me, like in my travels across the higher ed world, is that student success is either all inclusive and does all of it well, right? It's all one big bubble, or it's very segmented. And to Chris's point, you might have to go through 3 or 4 different student success groups, and then you'll find the one, or you'll find the administrator that they all report to. But if you're, depends on what your university, how it's set up, but they are worth talking to. And you get some really interesting feedback from, and that's sometimes the only way to get student feedback, because they're hearing it through those groups and organizations that report to them. So that was going to be my comment too, is that it's either fractured or it's inclusive, and it's good luck.
Well, Donnie, like I said at the beginning, I mean, we were discussing how do we wrap our minds around avoiding focusing on just the stuff when talking about a teaching and learning space. And your name bubbled to the top, so I'm glad we were able to have you on. We'll definitely have to have you back, and you can tell us more about what we're doing wrong, and most importantly, and better ways to do it, which I appreciate. Don't just come in and tell me I'm full of it, but here's how to fix it. Because it's interesting to me, having seen different institutions, interesting to me personally, that is, having seen different institutions who are at different levels of kind of maturity within an organization, supporting student teaching and learning and faculty teaching and learning, to go to see the different approaches and know that there are, hey, in about 5 years, this place is going to be ready for this sort of thing, which I saw 5 years ago, but we're not there yet. And to help kind of guide that into some places. And I'll just say, the one thing you said there that really stuck out to me, and I'm glad you said it because it backs up my entire philosophy here, has been to simplify the stuff, because faculty and students don't care what model projector it is. They don't care what the touch panel says. What they really don't like, though, and they will tell you straight up, is if the touch panel, button panel, whatever you have there has 27 options, there's about 25 too many. They really only want 3 or 4, and probably 1 or 2. And if you can figure out a way to dial that back so you're presenting them with the 1 or 2 or maybe 3 things they really wanted to use in the space, or for that sort of activity, that will help a lot. It goes a long way. It also makes, from the technologist perspective, it makes our lives easier because there's less stuff to troubleshoot. So.
Yep. Well, and I don't want to diss like the manufacturers out there either. I think there are some really incredible technologies.
Yeah, he doesn't care. Well, who do you want to diss?
Have you not heard our show?
Yeah. Well, all right. Let me clarify. I don't want to diss all of the technology manufacturers out there. I do think there's some really interesting products coming out, and I do think there's some really interesting applications for these things. But the technology should not be driving the conversations. Our faculty and our students should be driving these conversations. And student success, learning outcomes aren't about being comfortable in the room or being easy to use. It's about whether they actually learned anything by using that technology, or did that technology help them learn? And that's a question that we and the manufacturers can't really answer. We really have to engage our faculty and, frankly, some teaching and learning researchers better on this. And there are a bunch of groups out there I can point you all towards. Be happy to drop some links for you to share out that are trying to answer these sorts of questions. It's just a matter of getting everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction. We all want to do the same thing. I mean, it's one of our challenges is that as AV people, we love the technology. I mean, it's why we're doing it in the first place. The fact that people might actually get some benefit out of using the stuff we're putting together, that's just kind of gravy on top of it all. Mm-hmm. But the better we can make that whole process for everybody, not only the more fun we're having, but the better off everybody else will be too.
Love it. Donnie, awesome. Thank you for coming in here. And if people want to get a hold of you, if they say, I need to talk to Donnie, I track him down, he said something awesome and I want to follow up with him, what's a good way they can get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me. So D Merritt PhD at LinkedIn. I spend a whole lot of time there just because that's where I'm connecting with a lot of other folks too. Not really on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it this week. I've got a presence there, but I never check it. So LinkedIn's definitely the best place to find me.
What about your team and what's going on at UCF? Because like I said, maybe you're a little modest, but you guys are doing it right. If people want to go find out more about what you're up to there at UCF, what's a good link for that?
So we are just starting off revamping our website, the entire IT group. That'll be happening in the next few months. But you can go to oir.ucf.edu, and that'll take you straight to our office page, and you can find links to more of us from there too. And you'll also find some of our standards, classroom design standards, and those sorts of things on that page as well.
Very cool. I'm going to go steal.
Can you go ahead and give us a bill of materials, the programming, all the
Yeah.
times while you're at it?
Actually, if you can provide the programming so we don't have to write our own, just change the logos.
I'll just give you the index. How about if I just give you the index and you just purchase it and everything?
Here's your account string. You
You
guys just show up.
Yeah.
I tell you what, how about I connect you all to Jamel Mills, our lead designer, and Chris Moretti, our lead programmer, and see if you can wrestle it out of those two guys. But actually, in all seriousness, though, we're always happy to share that kind of stuff. Just reach out. We're always happy to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Any last thoughts for Donnie before we make him go back and do actual work? No, look at that. See, well, it's Friday afternoon actually, so I would say you're probably close enough to call it a day, right?
I'm close. I'm actually at our downtown campus today, so it feels a little bit like a vacation anyway.
Nice.
There you go.
Cool. Much appreciated. Thanks for coming on. We'll definitely have to have you back to talk about this further. It's been fantastic, and I'm glad we got you on to provide so much useful information and guidance for so many other people. For everyone like you who's doing it right, there are many of us who are doing it wrong.
You're not doing it wrong. You're just taking next steps towards getting to where you want to be.
Not doing it wrong, just doing it right the wrong way. Gotcha.
Well, thank you all for the invitation. It's been a blast today.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Donnie.
Thanks, Donnie.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So, here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
So for our final segment, and this is something we brought up, I was going to look it up today, but I forgot. A year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. So that's when it was. We said we were looking for a universal AV over IP interoperable standard, and we phrased it as we were looking for something as ubiquitous as the Dante of video. And lo and behold, because then I'm sure they were working on it at the time, here is Dante AV, not a great name to start with, but Dante AV, which is their video transport layer from the fine folks at Audinate. Well, I was looking at this was about 2-3 weeks ago, I was looking at something on their website and I noticed, wait a minute, there are now 3 flavors of Dante AV. Yeah. All with now increasingly inscrutable names and with different feature sets. So that's fun.
Why not?
Now, granted, there is some interoperability. They're built on different chipsets. There's reasons for these things to exist. I'll just phrase it this way and turn it over to the panel. Knock it off. This is not helping. You have shot yourself in the foot, and this is going to cause no shortage of issues. This is almost, not quite, but almost as bad as the 27 different flavors of Crestron DM. So now to the panel, any thoughts?
I will say the first time I look at their naming scheme, Dante AV-A does audio only, Dante AV-H is HDMI only, and Dante AV Ultra is both audio and video. That's just what the marketing tells me. I know. It's just what if I just read that only.
HDMI only.
I'm like,
no,
nothing.
This? Just there.
What is this? What's going on with this? So anyways, that's my first take on that.
I would like to think you have to pronounce it. It's Dante AV and Dante AV. It's just what the. Anyways.
All right. So I came out on the esports segment super salty, and I feel like I need to make up for that.
No, you don't.
You
Donnie
should
told
put like
us-
an advertising pitch in to hire Rachel to fix this nonsense.
Oh, we can't. It's a conflict of interest. Donnie told us that we should have empathy for teachers because they're dealing with more than we think they are. I would like to say the same thing about network standards developers. Have some empathy. They're dealing with more than we think they are.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to these naming conventions. Now, I will walk that back a bit and say, you know, like Dante, it's a proprietary protocol. They could call this anything. They don't have to deal with like working groups and stuff. They don't have to name this by committee. They can be super clear. And I'll end my commentary on that there. That option is available to them.
They could have named it, use this one, and then the other one's not this one or this one.
But I do have
these
empathy
two
because
are a
I
good
work
idea.
with some like open standards organizations. And I have a lot of empathy for the notion that, like, look, you create your foundational standard that covers the vast majority of use cases, but then you have to add on all these extensions for different niche use cases, because if you built them all into the foundational standard, then you would have something that was so complex that no one would ever implement it, or that in Dante's case would be so expensive that it would price the vast majority of chipsets out of use for like everyday use cases. So like you could get stuff that was useful in the broadcast world, but you would never get it down into your classrooms. So I think I don't mind the fact that they have tiers. I think that's probably going to bring this into like an economically feasible reality for a lot of like classroom AV manufacturers. Whereas if it were all just like, let's just do Dante AV Ultra and just call that Dante AV and it does all the things and we only need one, everything would cost, $100,000.
But we
I
had
think
this conversation
my biggest
yesterday,
gripe
Jeremy.
here-
The same thing.
My
Looking at
biggest
interns.
gripe here.
Play chicken. They're playing chicken
No,
right
go.
now.
I'm gonna kill. I'm gonna.
No, me first.
All right, go ahead.
I think we're on the same
Wait.
place. We're going the same way.
All right. Well, you start, and I'll correct you.
Okay. My biggest gripe here is I understand why, and I agree with you that they needed to have points of entry.
Well, it's also different chipsets too, so keep that in mind.
But on their audio side, typically there are some exceptions. If you buy a Dante product, it works with Dante products. You are now buying a Dante product that doesn't
might not
work with the other
another
Dante products.
product.
And you're like,
Yep.
at the bare minimum, wrapper this thing so that the other thing can see it. Are we on the same page, Mark?
Kinda, but maybe different. I think my whole piece was that
No.
I think there is a need. We were discussing yesterday about, or whenever the hell that was. We look at endpoints, right? We look at endpoints with Dante, endpoints without Dante. Maybe they're AES67, maybe they're not. And we have an encoder, we have a decoder. If I'm not listening to anything at my sync, I'm going to buy the one that doesn't have Dante, doesn't have AES67, because I don't care.
True.
Right.
Okay.
And so there are different capability needs for different scenarios. So I kind of see what the value can be here, because you don't necessarily need everything everywhere. I'm not going to buy the sledgehammer if all I'm doing is putting in a thumbtack. Right. And so it allows you to scale that. While is it inconvenient because you want to just recognize Dante as Dante? Maybe, but however, does it give you more granularity to actually choose the right tool at the right place? And I think that's how I take. I get it. Doesn't mean I necessarily like it or have to agree with it, but I think there is value in having different capability.
I'm good with the different versions.
I just find it goes against their whole how they built their audio side. How they built
I just think
that
the
to
names
work.
are confusing. Like, come up with better names.
But there's
Well,
also,
it does sort of put me in mind of our conversation that we had with Joe Cornwall a million years ago about USB-C, right? How there is supposed to be this one thing, and you just connect the thing to the thing, and it works. But instead, there are secretly a million flavors of USB-C, and you have to read the tea leaves of what cable do you have, what is your port capable of, like that it may or may not actually work together, and that has held USB-C back for a decade.
And I wonder if this will be the analogous. What's the word?
analogous. Yeah.
There it is.
We're getting points for it.
That's that Midwest
No
education
points.
coming out.
No,
point.
Public
analogous.
education.
I'll accept analogous. I knew what you were talking about.
See, there we go.
that works
doesn't
well in
help
Kentucky.
me.
I'm okay.
You and I,
I'm okay with that.
We probably shouldn't agree. But I think that's the same thing, is that people will look at it and say, oh man, is this holding it back? Could it have been better?
Audinate, this is a problem of Audinate's own making. Audinate is known for the name Dante more than like the company name. Their product line is better known than the company name. Mm-hmm. But Dante, to your earlier point about audio, a Dante device can talk with other Dante devices, etc. Now, yes, there are exceptions. By the way, I want to say to the people who have been spending the last 5 minutes yelling at their car stereo during this conversation that they've been in the left lane far too long. Please move over and let people pass. But they clearly tried to stay with the same branding because they're known by the Dante branding. But for all the reasons we just described, there are legitimate reasons why you would have 3 different tiers or 3 different product lines or whatever. But they stayed with that branding, and it's just muddying the water. So now there's 4 or 5, depending on how you look at it, flavors of Dante, a thing with a general technology known as Dante, and it's not going to have the level of interoperability that it could have or be as successful as it could have if they had come up with different names. They had the whatever, and then it could say powered by Dante or something at the bottom. However they wanted to do that, but that branding I think is going to be part of the issue.
And maybe there's more interoperability than we think. Maybe we'll have a discussion with Frank and company later on and see what he has to say. But the optics and the marketing material up front is just kind of my initial response. So dumb.
I feel
really bad if we had Frank on and he's the one who came up with the names.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm less anti the names than everybody else. It's so hard to do this in a way that does please people. And honestly, I'm just glad that there are different names, because what's worse is when you have the same name for everything and then it's really opaque why things don't work together. But yeah, I agree. We should have Frank on here to answer for his crimes.
Is there a chance that this is like, we're going to put this out here and we'll let you all decide which one is the one that's going to win, and then we will just kind of say, oh, no, you know what? These ones are no longer available anymore, and this is the one.
That's an expensive way to do it.
That could be it. It could be that...
Yes, it was.
Sorry, I have children. It could be that, they will discover that, one of these, like maybe Dante AVA answers 99.9% of all the use cases, and then eventually Dante AVH and Dante AV Ultra will be phased out, and the market will just decide that Dante AVA is what we really needed. That's totally possible.
Yeah.
A1A,
like 3D. All right. Any last thoughts for free bad marketing advice for the folks at Audinate?
I'm buying all of them everywhere. It's my new stuff.
You could buy one of each.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Jamie and apparently, I am the marketing guru on this call, and I just
are you a marketing guru? You are a legacy marketing strategist from the
strategist
title generation.
That's
we can't
legacy,
decide. Let's just do all of them. We'll put them all out. What's 3 times the cost? Doesn't matter. Let's go.
All right. Enough with this nonsense. I'm going to roll out of here. We'll just pick it up next time and see if we come up with some better ideas of things
stuff to do.
See ya.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV Super Friends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.
The big
discussion of things without the stuff, or AV without the stuff, or learning without the stuff, or however we want to call it. Is that
the stuff? You got stuff in my things.
Rachel, there are like a very limited amount of notes on the magical notes document, which is all the framework. Is about as far as we got when planning this discussion, and figured at a certain point we would shut up and just talk it out.
Yeah, we figured we weren't going to talk at all. Let's just do a whole show where Don comes in and we don't have to do anything. We just sit back. That was the goal.
Be careful what you ask for. Once I get started, it's hard to shut me up.
We came to that same conclusion. We're like, yeah, let's just do this.
Jesus. All right.
Where are those notes? Are they in the show episodes or in the notes doc?